Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to look at the production possibility frontier and really see what's going on in this second part of chapter 2. So with the production possibility frontier, it's going to be similar to our budget constraint, but the key difference is whereas our budget constraint says I have my income, I'm figuring out what to spend, but the PPF or production possibility frontier, what we'll largely be looking at is what resources do I have available and how can I allocate these resources to produce goods or services. One of the big differences between money and our resources, and if we think about our resources, labor, is for the most part, a dollar is a dollar. Nobody sits and says, well, if there's a 7 in the serial number of a currency, I'm not going to accept it. Right? A dollar for any of us is a dollar. Labor, not so much the same, right? With labor, we have different skill sets, we have different types of workers, we have that employee, we have that coworker employee that shows up 20 minutes late every shift. We have different skills. If we think about, say, math and English as an example, some of us may be good at math, others might be good at English, some of us might be good at both, other of us might really struggle with both. So we have different trade-offs and skills, and that's what the PPF is going to look at a little bit closer uh, than with the budget constraint. So first thing we're introducing is the production possibility frontier. And what this says, again, it's just this diagram, and it shows what productively efficient combinations we can produce given our resources. And for this, if we want to find the opportunity cost of a PPF, which we'll see a use for once we're talking about international trade and comparative advantage down the road. But if we want to find that, to find the opportunity cost, we just find the slope of our curve. So the example that we have, it deals with healthcare and education. And in this example for education, I'm going to suppose that this is education of health professionals, right? So we're thinking about med school, nursing school, and that kind of stuff. Then for healthcare, this is going to refer to our practitioners, right? So if you go out and you get your medical degree or you get your doctorate degree or your MD, doctorate of medicine, you have a choice to either go into practice or go into teaching. And for now, we're going to suppose that we have two types of doctors out there. The first is perhaps one that is brilliant, and this doctor knows everything there is to do, and they're great at practicing, and they're just an awesome doctor. But if they try to explain what they're doing, they can't really bring it down to our level, right? So we've had that teacher, professor before that's very, very smart, but just has a hard time getting it down to a level where the rest of us can understand. That's what this brilliant doctor is. So if we're at this point where, say, everybody is, or every doctor in the world is teaching, right, this brilliant doctor would be out here. Since this doctor can't really get points across well, if they switch from education over to healthcare over to practice, we're going to lose very little in education, but we're going to gain a lot in terms of our healthcare, right? Which we kind of see here. Again, we have a little loss in education, but a big gain in healthcare. Similarly, we may have another doctor who, if we're doing all healthcare, if everyone's a practitioner, who this doctor can explain stuff really well. You go to your consultation and the doctor explains stuff in a way that just makes perfect sense. You understand everything he's going to do. But as you're in your consultation, you notice that this doctor kind of has a little bit of a fidget, right? Can't keep their hand steady. And then you get kind of nervous and you maybe ask for someone who can keep their hand steady. Not to be rude or anything like that, but if you have if as an educator, I come in, I'm drawing a graph, and I mess up a little bit, I can just erase it and call it good. If a doctor messes up just a little bit, potentially it could mean issues if you're talking about heart surgery, brain surgery, right? If the wrong vein or artery gets cut, you might have some bigger issues than just something you can just erase. But with this doctor, what we might see is if they start out as a practitioner, or we're in the state where everybody's practicing, this doctor can get out of practice and not lose that much because a lot of people don't want to have them as their doctor. But since they can explain stuff so well, we're going to gain a whole lot on the education front. So we have these two doctors. And that's kind of what we're going to see happen with as a general trend. So one of the things we're going to notice is that as we get towards one extreme or the other, we're gonna encounter what's called this law of diminishing returns. Basically, what this says, we get to more of an extreme of one end, our gains are going to be smaller and smaller and smaller. Just like our law of diminishing marginal utility, right? As we get to that 6 and 7 slice of pizza, they don't do as much. Similarly, as we get towards this more extreme end of specialization, the last little bit isn't going to do as much as the first little bit. So in this case, what we might see is as we move from everybody being a practitioner to everybody being an educator, the first doctor who has the fidgety hand, right, loses just a little bit in healthcare, but gains a lot in education. Then the next doctor would lose still maybe just a little bit in healthcare and gain some education. Not as drastic as the first one, but still a little bit. Then the next one, again, we did that same thing. That gain in education on each one of these steps goes from relatively large to a medium, and it gets smaller. And we're going to see that as we go through. It's more or less just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until we get to our last doctor. And this is the one who is a great practitioner but really can't explain what they're doing. That last doctor is going to have a huge loss in medicine, but only a small gain in education. Right? So our return from switching from healthcare down to education starts big, gets smaller, 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 and then smallest with our last practitioner. And then same thing if we went the other way. So if we started with everybody in education, we're going to see that this first doctor who really can't explain stuff but is a great practitioner, right? They're going to lose very little in education, but this gain in healthcare or gain in practice is going to be huge. Then the next one, again, maybe a small, and then it's going to get smaller, and same thing, smaller, 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 and that'll kind of keep going on up. And again, our gains in practice are going to keep getting smaller as we get to this extreme end of the healthcare spectrum. And when we think about this, so we mentioned these two extreme doctors. We also have people who are in the middle. So in medicine, you have your residency, and you do a residency under a practitioner. And this residency can almost be thought of as very similar to like an apprenticeship. So when we come into this graph, on both extremes, we have up here we have our doctor with the fidgety hand. And down here we have the doctor who just can't explain what's going on. But in the middle here, we may have a lot of we'll have our practitioners that are at, say, university hospitals. And what they'll often have is residents that are working under them. So with this resident, right, they have a very good practice, and they can also explain what's going wrong. So if you're at a university hospital, sometimes they may have a resident come in and check you out, and then the doctor would kind of make sure they're thinking the stuff right. If the resident checks you out and misdiagnoses something or sees something a little wrong, the doctor will explain to that resident, hey, you're close, but this is kind of what you need to be thinking about. So those middle people can practice or they can do education. It's not detrimental to either system if they're in one or the other. I hope this video was good. As always, if you need anything, feel free to let me know.